Is ticking for Theresa May to come up with an agreement on Brexit divorce talks. The European Commission has confirmed the Prime Minister only has until the end of the weekend to seal a deal, and there's disquiet within Conservative ranks that she's losing the support of Brexiteer MPs. But the Prime Minister did receive a boost from Cabinet colleague Chris Grayling this morning. This is what he said.
The reality is the country will not and should not sign up to a bad deal. The Prime Minister has been very clear in saying no deal is better than a bad deal for Britain. Nobody should expect us to sign up to a bad deal for Britain. But I'm very optimistic about this. I think we want an agreement. All my conversations with other European ministers suggest that they want an agreement, and I'm sure we'll get there.
So, could Mrs May's time in number 10 be finally up? Joining me to discuss this are Rowena Mason, political correspondent for The Guardian, and Juliet Samuels, columnist at The Telegraph. Rowena, Juliet, really good to see you both. Rowena, if I could firstly start with you, should we be as optimistic as the Transport Secretary that a deal can be done?
I think that it's looking increasingly tricky for Theresa May to get a deal done in the next couple of days. The timescale is very tight, and the DUP, her political partners in Northern Ireland, are certainly making it hard for her, saying that they absolutely will not accept the wording that's on the table at the moment. So she's having to work very hard, and she needs either the DUP or the EU and Dublin in particular to make concessions. It's just really a matter of waiting to see whether there'll be a breakthrough on that front before Sunday evening.
Juliet's quite a headache for the Prime Minister.
Yes, I'm actually, though, on the EU front, I actually do think that the PM is capable of getting a deal through, and I think it's probably still more likely than not that there will be agreement next week in Brussels. But I think what this week has revealed is that the way Downing Street is functioning is not working, and the Prime Minister is not consulting with people. She's not bringing them with her, and I think there's a huge amount of distrust and disquiet, particularly in Brexiteer ranks, at what they see as a sort of totally a blindsiding earlier this week. Not just the DUP, but many Brexiteers as well feel that the Downing Street operation simply isn't working, and I think that's why at the moment the Prime Minister is actually in more danger of a sort of rebellion than she has been since any time after the general election.
So, Juliet, is that another way of saying that the Prime Minister's time is almost up?
It could be. I mean, I think there's a mixture of feeling. There's some people who feel that it's working so badly that there's no communications coming from Downing Street. People are sort of saying, you know, what is Gavin Barwell doing? There aren't calls coming out. That's the Director of Communications at Downing Street. And so there's definitely a strength of feeling that this cannot go on and may have to go. But at the same time, there's a strong aversion to risk. There's still a worry about what that will entail. But I think people's feelings are shifting because they're thinking, well, if this is how phase one negotiations are conducted, how is it going to work when we get into trade deal negotiations? And is the PM going to bounce the Brexit wing of the party into something they don't want?
So, Rowena, how is it going to work when we get to trade negotiations?
I think that stage is very difficult because at the moment, Theresa May still has not had that incredibly tricky conversation with her cabinet about what our relationship with Europe is going to look like. They call it the end state, what our relationship is going to look like after Brexit. So she's got these things piling up in her in tray before Christmas. She's got to get this deal through the European Council by the end of next week. She's got the EU withdrawal bill coming back to the Commons and some very difficult votes, possibly calls for her by Remain MPs, and then she's got this cabinet discussion where they're going to have to square off the different factions. On one side you've got Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who the Leave supporters who absolutely won't countenance any sort of idea that we're going to keep European regulations, and then on the other side you've got the more soft Brexiteers like Philip Hammond, who are on the other side of that argument and want us to keep us as close to the single market and customs union as possible. So, as Juliet says, it is looking like Theresa May's facing an increasingly shaky time of it. But on the other hand, she serves at the pleasure of her party, and at the moment, probably the bulk of her MPs still think that she is the best option for getting the Conservative Party through to Brexit in March 2019, in the absence of any other really good options to take over from her.
Juliet, Rowena raises a very interesting point. There are a lot of groups and a lot of people to keep happy, yet the Conservatives are still deeply concerned that if Theresa May does walk out of Downing Street, you're going to be opening the way for Jeremy Corbyn and a Labour government.
Yes, there's definitely, I think among MPs, as we've seen, there's a huge aversion to risk and the worry of triggering another general election. But I think that as Brexit negotiations proceed and crisis points start to pile up and concessions start to be made, that the failings of the operation in Downing Street will start to become more and more apparent, to the point where it may become untenable. And so the question is, do you take a big risk now, or do you take the risk that this is somehow going to work next year when it hasn't worked very well this year?
Rowena, if there still isn't an agreement by the 14th of December, Brexit talks stall, what happens then?
Then you start, I think, to hear businesses getting extremely concerned about the lack of certainty, the lack of a possibility about talking about trade and transition with other EU countries. They've been pushing for that to happen by Christmas. So I guess it depends on whether the EU might convene some special councils to try and get this sorted before their next council meeting. But it means that basically the Remainers start to get very worried that we're running out of time for a trade deal to be done, and those leavers who support getting a trade deal. On the other hand, it might please some Brexit supporters who basically think that we should be walking away without a deal anyway, and that the EU has been pushing Theresa May too far. They'd be perfectly happy to leave and go on to WTO terms.
Yeah, on the part of businesses, Julius, there is a concern from representatives of businesses that contingency plans will be forced to be put in place. That might come at a cost to a number of jobs in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I mean, we're almost at the point where it's too late to stop a lot of those plans being activated. I mean, some businesses say that, maybe you have until about February, March next year, but large complex banks, for example, are having to plan on the basis that there will not be a deal that maintains anything like the current access that they have. So we're really getting to the point where decisions are being made. We're beyond that point in many cases. And the question now is, the government has come this far without deciding where it wants to get to in the end, and there needs to be a showdown. There needs to be some kind of reckoning whereby the cabinet members sit around the table and a strategy is decided upon, and then people who, if they feel they can't support it, they need to leave government, because it simply cannot go on that there's just no idea of what the government is aiming for, and that sense of uncertainty is particularly corrosive to business as well as to the whole political scene.
Rowena, can the cabinet sit down and come to a unified agreement, or are they way too divided for that to happen?
I think we'll see. I mean, it's going to just be an extremely interesting meeting that could possibly see walkouts at the end of it if we find that the positions are just irreconcilable. But I mean, they did manage to agree on the wording of the Florence speech, which Theresa May gave earlier this autumn. So it's not inconceivable that they could come up with a form of words that they're all signed up to, even while their opinions on trade are actually quite divergent.
Rowena, Juliet, many thanks indeed for joining us. Thanks for your time.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.